You wake up to the sound of water hitting metal. Not rain, just the slow rhythm of a tin bucket filling with river mud. Your fingers ache, your palms are raw, and somewhere in that mud, a stone worth more than your life is waiting to be found. It's the 1990s. You are deep inside Sierra Leone, a place so rich in beauty, the earth itself is both blessing and curse. The sun burns through the haze, revealing men, women, and children bent over the river like reflections of one another. Each handful of gravel's a gamble, freedom or death, hunger or payment. This is the age of blood diamonds, a time when the sparkle of love was bought with war, when beauty became a weapon, when rivers paid for rifles, and greed dressed itself as destiny. In this story, we'll walk through the pits and the politics, from the mines of Kono to the boardrooms of De Beers. This isn't just a story about diamonds, it's a story about what happens when the ground beneath your feet becomes more valuable than the life standing on it. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like or subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and let it out. Because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. You wake up to the sound of shovels against gravel, 100 small metallic hearts beating at once. The dawn over Kono district is copper red, beautiful, almost holy, until you look down. Your hands are already blistered before the sun climbs the palms. The river that runs beside the camp used to feed cassava fields. Now it feeds men. You step barefoot into the cold mud. The older miners call it the soup. They say the earth's richest veins are always found beneath the places that smell like decay. You can't argue. Every few minutes, someone yells out, "Shine." That means a diamond has been found. Small, clear, a fragment of light that could buy a weapon, a house, or a lifetime of silence. They call these fields the farms of hell. Officially, this is Sierra Leone, 1991. Unofficially, it's the first chapter in a war financed by stones no larger than fingernails. The Revolutionary United Front, led by Foday Sanko, has swept through the east with guns supplied by Liberian warlord Charles Taylor. In villages like yours, the RUF's message is simple: dig or die. International news still speaks of unrest. The word hides everything: the gunfire, the burned houses, the missing. But everyone here knows that each stone dug from this riverbed will soon travel farther than any of you ever will. First to Liberia, then to Antwerp, Tel Aviv, or London. A perfect chain of custody built on fear. By the time the first shipment leaves Freetown's coast, someone in Europe is already ordering champagne to celebrate another stable quarter. At the top of that world sits De Beers, an empire forged by Cecil Rhodes a century earlier, now headquartered in London and Johannesburg. Its central selling organization decides how many diamonds the world will see each year. Not one more, not one less. Scarcity is the secret. Desire is the engine. A diamond, they said, is forever. They never mentioned whose forever would pay for it. You rinse the gravel in your sieve. Your reflection stares back distorted, half human, half river. When a stone appears, clear as glass, your chest tightens. It's smaller than a raindrop, yet heavy with consequence. The overseer takes it before you can blink, drops it into a pouch, and marks your name with chalk on a board nailed to a tree. You won't see the chalk again after sunset. Rain or blood will wash it away. Sometimes at night, you dream of what happens next. Trucks move down the dirt roads, soldiers guarding crates wrapped in burlap. Across the border, the stones are swapped for AK-47s, rocket launchers, and radios that can call death faster than prayer. Each weapon costs about a handful of diamonds. Economists will later call it a parallel economy. You call it madness that glitters. The radio crackles in the distance. Someone in Freetown says the United Nations is watching, but even satellites can't see through cloud and corruption. In Angola, UNITA rebels fund their own war the same way, mining riverbeds along the Kwango Valley. From 1992 to 2002, diamonds worth billions flow through smuggling routes to Belgium. International companies buy them unknowingly. The paper trail is clean, the conscience isn't. I remember when the first foreign journalists arrived. They came in pressed shirts, smelling of soap and fear. They filmed children lifting buckets, women sifting gravel with babies on their backs. One of them asked me if I believed the world cared. I told him, the world will care as soon as we stop shining. He laughed, wrote it down, and left before dark. 2 weeks later, rebels burned his notes along with the village. Far away, De Beers executives hold meetings about illicit channels. They promise to halt purchasing from conflict zones, but continue to buy through intermediaries. The logic is cold. If they don't buy, competitors will. If competitors buy, the market destabilizes, and diamonds hate chaos, except the kind that hides their birth. You watch a boy beside you, no older than 13, pull a stone the size of a rice grain from the mud. His face lights up for half a heartbeat before the guard snatches it away. That single sparkle might earn a warlord enough to feed his soldiers for a week. The boy will get a bowl of cassava peelings and another day's permission to breathe. He'll go home and tell his sister he's seen God's tear, and she'll ask what color it was. He'll say, the color of nothing. The years blur. By 1999, an estimated 20% of the world's rough diamonds are conflict stones. Human Rights Watch publishes reports so graphic they seem like fiction. The UN issues Resolution 1173 on Angola, then 1306 on Sierra Leone, banning diamond trade from rebel areas. But diamonds have wings. They fly under false certificates, wrapped in cash and diplomacy. The same year, a British NGO named Global Witness coins the phrase that will haunt the industry: blood diamonds, it sticks. For the first time, the sparkle is paired with shame. De Beers shutters its central selling organization, claims innocence, and supports talks for a certification scheme. They call it the Kimberley Process, a name that sounds clean enough to forget. One evening you sit by the river, fingers raw, wondering how many lives could fit inside a single carrot. The math becomes dizzying. For every one diamond polished, how many bodies buried? For every engagement ring sold, how many limbs lost? You know the numbers won't help you sleep, but you count anyway. The rebels retreat. Peacekeepers arrive in pale blue helmets that look too bright for this soil. They bring notebooks, not shovels. They talk of reconciliation, of rebuilding, but the mines remain. They always remain. Today, in glossy stores across New York, Tokyo, and Paris, the same stones gleam behind glass. The certificates say, conflict-free, stamped with bureaucratic faith. Few buyers ask what that means. Fewer still imagine the river, where the morning smells like iron and fear. If they did, perhaps the sparkle would dim a little. But markets run on forgetting. You look down once more at your hands. The calluses are your only inheritance. In them, you can still see faint traces of mica and mud, like ghosts of the earth's memory. You whisper to the stone you never got to keep. You were born in darkness. May you never see the sun the same way again. The wind carries your words into the trees, where they rustle like uncut gems waiting to be found. The river keeps flowing, indifferent and eternal, a mirror for the human heart, beautiful, restless, and willing to trade anything for a little light. And when you close your eyes, you realize the sparkle and the shadow were never separate things. They were always the same story, refracted through the world's desire to believe beauty is innocent. You wake not to birds, but to glass, a window view so clear it seems impossible after years of dust. The calendar says 1999, but in here, inside De Beers' London headquarters, it might as well still be 1888. The furniture glows with the same mahogany sheen as Cecil Rhodes's empire, and the diamonds glitter in neat rows under sterile light. They look harmless, innocent. You think of the river again and wonder how something born in blood could look so clean in glass. The company calls itself a custodian of stability. They don't mind the stones, not anymore. They manage them. Every carat, every shipment, every whisper of scarcity that keeps the world hungry for sparkle. De Beers once controlled over 80% of the global diamond market. Its central selling organization, hidden behind layers of secrecy, decided how many stones the world deserved to see. They could make or break nations by simply locking a vault. To them, diamonds were never just minerals. They were feelings, manufactured, packaged, and sold. By the time the 1990s arrived, the empire had learned the most profitable lesson of all. You don't sell stones, you sell stories. Across the ocean, in New York, an advertising slogan from the 1940s still hummed in every jewelry store window. A diamond is forever. The campaign created by copywriter Francis Garrity for the NWA agency, turned a geological accident into an emotional necessity. Love now required proof, and proof required payment. Every proposal became a small act of brand loyalty. De Beers didn't invent love, but they invented its price. They told the world that men who truly cared spent 2 months' salary on a ring. They taught generations to equate permanence with carrots and affection with shine. By the late 20th century, it wasn't just an ad, it was doctrine. You imagine the irony somewhere in Koidu, a miner bleeds into the same earth that funds this illusion of eternity. He doesn't know the slogan, but he knows its weight. Every shovel of dirt pays for someone's promise far away. Inside De Beers boardrooms, men in tailored suits speak in the language of restraint. Market equilibrium, supply discipline, stabilization. What they mean is control. No gem leaves the system without a blessing from the cartel. From Botswana to Namibia, from Angola to Sierra Leone, every stone eventually bends to London's gravity. But by the mid-1990s, that gravity starts to wobble. Reports from Angola and Sierra Leone paint a picture that no press release can polish. Global Witness and Amnesty International expose the truth. Rebel groups are selling diamonds to fund war. These stones, indistinguishable from legitimate ones, are entering De Beers vaults through third parties. Publicly, De Beers denies knowledge. Privately, their buyers know better. A De Beers official once described it as the price of maintaining order. Order, it seems, demands a little blindness. In the archives, a photograph shows Cecil Rhodes holding a pickaxe, the desert stretching behind him like an empire unrolled. He built De Beers on monopoly, colonial labor, and land taken from black South Africans. By the time apartheid formalized these hierarchies, De Beers had already perfected them. Black miners worked deep underground for pennies, living in fenced compounds called closed towns. Their contracts forbade them from leaving, marrying, or even buying alcohol. Diamonds, they were told, must be protected from temptation. Temptation, of course, meant the miners themselves. You walk through the company's museum room, photographs of African miners smiling for corporate brochures. Below them, a plaque reads, "Our legacy of excellence." You pause. The silence in the room hums like guilt under glass. If the walls could speak, they'd tell of how De Beers bought up competitors, destroyed unsanctioned stones, and invented global scarcity. For a century, they convinced the world that diamonds were rare. They aren't. What's rare is a company that can convince billions to believe it. In Antwerp, where 80% of the world's rough diamonds pass through, traders speak quietly, moving parcels that gleam like snow in the dark. Each parcel has a certificate of origin, though everyone knows paper can lie. Conflict stones slide into the mix with ease. When asked how they can tell the difference, one dealer shrugs. You can't, but you can pretend. That pretense keeps the industry alive. It also keeps the wars alive. Every ring in a Paris boutique funds, however faintly, another gunshot somewhere far away. Invisible economics, the global alchemy of suffering into luxury. Then come the press conferences. By 1999, under mounting pressure, De Beers publicly acknowledges the issue. They call for reform, insisting they've never knowingly purchased conflict diamonds. Their spokesmen talk about transparency and ethics, but the words sound rehearsed, like diamonds, recut to hide their cracks. Privately, executives debate whether the brand can survive the stain. Internally, memos warn, the diamond's reputation is more fragile than the gem itself. That line will prove prophetic. I once met a man who worked as a sorter in the central selling organization. He'd handled millions of stones over 3 decades. When I asked him if he could tell which ones came from war zones, he laughed softly. You think the stones whisper where they've been? They don't. They're silent. We give them their story when we sell them. He paused, rolling a flawless gem between his fingers. It's the cleanest lie on earth. Meanwhile, in the places that fed this empire, people start waking up from the illusion. Botswana demands a greater share of profits. Namibia renegotiates mining rights. South Africa pushes for beneficiation, the cutting and polishing to happen locally, not just the digging. The old colonial model begins to fracture. De Beers retreats strategically, selling off mines, claiming it's empowering local partners. But the truth is simpler. Control is shifting, and they want to exit gracefully. Back in Sierra Leone, the war rages on. The RUF's campaign of terror leaves entire provinces in ruin. UN reports list tens of thousands killed, hundreds of thousands displaced. The diamonds continue to flow, smuggled through Liberia, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire. Each route carved by desperation and greed. Each stone a passport without a country. In 2000, the United Nations Security Council passes Resolution 1306, banning the trade in uncertified Sierra Leone diamonds. The world starts talking about a Kimberley Process. Governments, NGOs, and diamond companies gather in South Africa to design a system that can trace a gem from mine to finger. It's ambitious, it's bureaucratic, it's imperfect, but it's something. You watch the news one night in a London hotel room. A diplomat on television calls it the dawn of ethical trade. You think of the dawns you've known, the ones that smelled of diesel, smoke, and damp earth. This one smells of optimism and self-congratulation. You wonder if the river in Kono would recognize itself in these promises. By morning, the papers declare victory. Conflict diamonds curbed by global pact. But deep down, everyone in the industry knows what the miners already did. There's always another loophole, another border, another night flight, with stones hidden in a bag of rice. Still, the myth survives. A diamond is forever. It whispers through time, immune to scandal, polished by repetition. Couples still kneel, still propose, still believe. Perhaps they should, because belief, more than geology, is what keeps this empire alive. The diamond trade isn't built on the earth, it's built on emotion. And emotions, unlike stones, can't be certified or contained. You leave the De Beers building at dusk. The city glows like 1,000 small reflections. The street lights, the windows, the shop displays. You realize that London too is a mine. Only here, the digging is polite. The pickaxes are pens. The overseers wear cologne and shake hands instead of rifles. You think of the river again, the one that glittered with both light and loss. And for a moment, the two worlds blur, the suits and the soldiers, the lovers and the liars, the sparkle and the shadow, all reflections of the same unbreakable idea that beauty, when profitable enough, can always be forgiven. The river keeps moving even when you stop. The shovel grows heavy in your hands. You stare at the reflection in the water, a face you barely recognize. Somewhere behind you, a guard shouts. Somewhere ahead, the jungle hums. And in that silence between them, something shifts. You stop thinking in second person. You stop saying you, because this isn't a story about someone else anymore. It's about me. I was there when the trucks came. I was there when the river swallowed names faster than bodies. And I am still here, years later, trying to tell what the earth refused to forget. I remember the first man who ever called himself a trader. He wore a white shirt too clean for the river and a grin too confident for hunger. Gold rings flashed on his fingers every time he spoke, as if punctuation had become jewelry. He arrived in a pickup that smelled of diesel and foreign perfume. The camp stopped working the moment his tires touched the mud. Guards straightened, miners froze, and even the river seemed to hesitate. He said he could turn our sweat into money, that he could make the world notice what we were digging. We didn't know then that the world had noticed long ago. It just preferred to look through men like him. The middlemen were the real architects of the trade, not soldiers, not miners, not even the warlords who claimed the pits. They were the translators of greed, fluent in every currency, loyal to none. They moved between camps like shadows in designer shoes, trading sacks of gravel for sacks of bullets. One of them, a man named Tamba, taught me the first rule: never show excitement when you find a stone. Excitement makes the price go down. Fear makes it go up. He said it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I watched him weigh a diamond on a small brass scale, a pebble of light balancing against a coin of gold. For a moment, it looked fair. Then he took the stone and the coin. That's when I understood. Middlemen don't measure value, they invent it. He claimed to work for someone in Monrovia, a buyer who had buyers of his own. He carried papers with stamps and signatures no one could read. He said the names quietly, like prayers: De Beers, Antwerp, Dubai. They sounded less like places and more like destinations of fate. At night, when the camp slept, Tamba counted his profits under lantern light. He hummed softly, the way men hum when they mistake power for peace. Outside, we dreamed of water and escape. He dreamed of airports. By the time dawn came, he was already gone, back towards the border, his truck full of uncut light and uncut lies. We went back to digging. The river didn't ask where the diamonds went. It only asked for more. That's how it was for years. Men like Tamba came and went, each one promising fairness, each one leaving richer than the last. They spoke about peace like it was a product, something you could ship, weigh, and sell. The middlemen carried no weapons, but they controlled more than any commander. They were the bridge between the mud and the money, between the men who bled and the men who smiled. Without them, the war might have drowned in its own silence. With them, it learned to breathe in profit. They arrived with briefcases and left with pockets of stars. Every trip they made was another verse in the hymn of greed, one that reached as far as the boardrooms of London and the vaults of Antwerp. Most of them never touched a gun. They didn't need to. Their paperwork did the killing quietly. Tamba came back 6 months later. He'd gained weight and confidence. He wore a gold chain and carried a satellite phone that looked like a weapon. He called it his lifeline, said it connected him to the world. For us, the world was still the river. He told us he'd met buyers who worked for a company called De Beers, said they controlled everything, prices, supply, even the myth of rarity. We didn't know the word cartel, but we understood ownership. Tamba said the company no longer bought directly from rebels, but everyone knew that wasn't the full truth. In this business, hands never stayed clean, only busy. He carried laminated cards, export permits from Liberia, invoices from Guinea, and sometimes a government seal that looked suspiciously homemade. Every piece of paper was an eraser, a way to wipe the blood before the diamond left the continent. One night, he let me hold one. It was warm from his pocket. The paper smelled like oil and ink and deceit. Across the top, in perfect English, it read, Certificate of Provenance. I stared at it for a long time. It felt heavier than any stone I'd ever touched. Keep that, he said, smiling. It's your ticket out one day. I still have it, folded and worn, a relic of faith in systems that never meant to save us. By 1996, the trade had become routine. Miners dug, traders arrived, shipments left, and the war machine kept humming. Each diamond was a note in an unending song, soft, relentless, lucrative, and like all songs that sell, no one cared who wrote it. Then came the rumors. Trucks crossing into Liberia at night. Diamonds exchanged for crates wrapped in tarpaulin. New guns appearing in rebel camps. Guns no one could afford, but everyone carried. Tamba's visits grew shorter, his voice sharper. He said things were changing, that new men were in charge now, new markets, new risk. He never said war. He didn't need to. We could hear it in the silence that followed him. Once, I asked him if he ever saw where the diamonds ended up. He looked at me as if I'd asked where the wind goes. He said, "They end up everywhere." Then he added, "Some stones travel farther than their diggers ever will." That night, I dreamed of one of our diamonds lying in a velvet box, under glass, with someone's reflection smiling above it. In the dream, I couldn't tell whether it was love or ownership. Maybe it was both. Weeks later, the first convoy arrived. Men in fatigues, rifles gleaming under the sun. They came not to buy, but to collect. The riverbanks turned quiet. Tamba disappeared again. When he came back, he wasn't wearing gold anymore, just a sidearm. He said things were different now, that the diamonds belonged to the cause, that every stone would buy freedom. But when I looked at the guns in the trucks, I realized freedom had become another export. The middlemen were no longer visitors. They were generals without uniforms, fighting wars from hotel rooms and counting victories in carats. They had found the perfect business, one where everyone lost, except the sellers. Soon after, Tamba vanished for good. Some said he'd gone to Monrovia. Others said he'd been shot by the same rebels he supplied. I never found out, but sometimes, when I saw the river shimmer at dusk, I thought of his words. Some stones travel farther than their diggers ever will. By then, the guns had begun to multiply. So had the graves, and the river, our old companion, started to sound different. Less like water, more like metal. That's when I realized the middlemen were only the first act. The real story was still coming, and it would not whisper, it would roar. Because soon the diamonds wouldn't just buy silence, they'd buy war. I remember the first truck that came after that. Old, armored, coughing black smoke into the trees. Men with rifles hanging from their shoulders stepped down, laughing like they owned the sun. That was the day the trade changed forever. The truck carried no diamonds, it carried control. Within weeks, others followed, convoys of soldiers and rebels, their uniforms mismatched, their allegiance written only in dust. They said they came for protection, but everyone knew what they protected most, the stones. Before that, we dug in fear. Now we dug in chains. The camps turned into prisons without walls. Guards watched every movement, rifles gleaming like commandments. Anyone caught hiding a stone vanished by nightfall. No questions, no graves. They called it the exchange. Diamonds for guns, light for death. Every shipment that left the mine returned as ammunition. The rifles looked foreign, Belgian, Russian, sometimes American. They said they came from a man across the border named Charles Taylor, a name that moved through the air like thunder. Taylor was president of Liberia then, or so the radios claimed, but he was more than that. He was a merchant of ambition, a preacher of power. They said he could turn gravel into bullets and promises into profit. And through him, our diamonds became the bloodstream of a war that bled across borders. I never met him, but I saw his fingerprints everywhere. New guns, new trucks, new slogans painted on walls that crumbled faster than the paint dried. Every rifle had the same story, bought with a stone pulled from the same river I once drank from. Sometimes, I wondered how far a single diamond could travel. Could it buy the fuel for a helicopter? Could it pay for the printing of propaganda leaflets dropped over villages? Could it become a necklace in some faraway capital, shining politely above a peace speech? The rebels said the diamonds were our freedom. They called them stones of liberation. But liberation has a strange sense of humor. The more we dug, the less free we became. We heard rumors of training camps across the border, Liberian soldiers teaching Sierra Leone rebels how to fight, how to terrify, how to rule. They brought back new tactics, new orders, new kinds of cruelty, and the trucks kept coming, each one heavier with guns, lighter with mercy. At night, I watched the commanders sit around a fire, trading stones like playing cards. They said each one could buy 10 rifles, or 100 bullets, or 1,000 lies. They laughed like men who'd forgotten they were human. I wondered if that was part of the training too. The radio called it a revolution. We called it business. Every man had a price, and the currency was shining right beneath our feet. By 1997, the river was no longer a river. It was a supply chain. The diamonds went west, through Monrovia. The guns came east, through the same hands that blessed the trade. And somewhere in between, the world pretended not to see. I remember one shipment, a line of trucks stretching past the horizon, each one loaded with gravel sacks, each sack holding maybe 3 or 4 stones worth a lifetime. The commander ordered us to watch as they drove off. He said, "These are the seeds of peace." Then he laughed, and the soldiers laughed with him. Weeks later, the same trucks returned with crates marked agricultural supplies. Inside were guns, grenades, and boxes of ammunition wrapped in rice sacks. The seeds of peace had bloomed into fire. Sometimes, the guards bragged about where the diamonds went. Europe, they said. America. The places where love lives. They said it like a curse, because here, love was dangerous. People died for it, or because of it. No one wore it on a finger. The UN started sending observers around that time, men in white trucks with blue helmets and careful eyes. They wrote things down, nodded gravely, and left. The next day, the shooting resumed. Observation, it turned out, was not the same as intervention. One night, I watched a young soldier polish his rifle by the firelight. He was no older than 15. He said he'd never held a diamond, only guns. "Which one's worth more?" he asked. No one answered. We started hearing stories of mutilations, villages burned, families punished, hands taken as warnings. Fear became the new border control. The rebels didn't need checkpoints when terror traveled faster than the trucks. By then, Tamba was gone, but his lessons remained. He'd said the world runs on transactions, not truth. And he was right. Now the transaction had simply changed form. Stones for guns, labor for survival, silence for breath. The commanders started keeping ledgers, columns of numbers, names, and carat weights. I saw one once, neat handwriting, ink smudged by rain. It looked almost holy, like the scriptures of prophet. In the following months, the fighting intensified. New factions emerged, new flags, same hunger. Every gun seemed to demand another diamond, and every diamond begged for another grave. By the end of that year, the pits were emptier, the people thinner. The soldiers no longer smiled when they came. They didn't need to. Power had made them silent. Only the river spoke, and even it was losing patience. Sometimes I dreamed of the trucks, their engines growling through the night like restless animals. I'd wake up sweating, convinced they were coming back. Then I'd hear the wind move through the grass and realize it wasn't the trucks I feared anymore. It was the quiet. Because in this war, silence meant the next storm was loading. The diamonds had made everyone rich in illusion. Rebels, traders, governments, corporations, all part of the same unbroken chain. Even the world outside joined the economy of denial. They condemned us by day, bought from us by night. And so, the river kept flowing, washing away the evidence, polishing guilt into clarity. We became suppliers of both beauty and despair. Our export was contradiction. One evening, I saw a child soldier wearing a necklace made of spent bullet casings and tiny stones tied together with wire. He said it was good luck. He said the stones kept him safe. Then he marched into the forest and never came back. By 1998, the UN would call it the Blood Diamond Crisis. But to us, it was just another day at the mine. We didn't have headlines, only scars. The war had found its rhythm now. Dig, trade, shoot, repeat. The trucks became routine, the violence expected. And through it all, the river kept feeding both sides, indifferent as time. One night, as the guns echoed across the hills, I sat by the water and whispered to Kamara's grave. It's not the diamonds that are cursed, it's the people who keep believing they can own them. The wind didn't answer. It never does. When the sun rose the next morning, the sky was the color of ash. The soldiers were already loading the next shipment. The war had found its next excuse, and we had found our next grave. We thought the worst was behind us, that once the guns arrived, nothing could surprise us again. But we were wrong. The war was about to change shape. It would move from the fields into the flesh. The next chapter of our lives would not be written in smoke or money. It would be written in scars. We thought the river had taken enough from us, but it wanted more. They said the punishment started as a message, a way to warn others what happens when the work stops or when the wrong stone goes missing. But messages, once written in blood, have a way of repeating themselves. Soon, the warning became the rule, and the rule became the landscape. The first time I saw it, I didn't believe it was real. A man stumbled into camp, his arm wrapped in cloth, his face the color of clay. He had no hand. He said the rebels called it Operation No Living Hand. They said, "You vote with this hand, you dig with this hand, now you'll do neither." Villages burned like brush fires. Amputations weren't random, they were deliberate, systematic, a way to erase identity, to remind everyone that their bodies belonged to the war as much as the diamonds did. In Sierra Leone, the Revolutionary United Front became infamous for it. Men, women, children, no one exempt. They called the victims the living dead. And still, somehow, we kept digging. The commanders said the world didn't care, that no one would believe us anyway. And for a long time, they were right. The outside world called these rumors exaggerated stories from a jungle too distant to matter. It took years of photographs and testimony before the truth finally reached the United Nations. By then, the rivers had already carried away most of the evidence. I worked beside a man named Kamara. He had one good hand and a smile that refused to die. He'd lost the other after hiding a small stone in his mouth. They caught him before he swallowed. When I asked him later if it was worth it, he laughed. "I wasn't stealing," he said. "I was saving it from them." At night, he'd tell stories of the old Sierra Leone, before the diamonds, before the guns. A place of markets, music, and palm wine. He said people once dug only for cassava roots, never for survival. But war changes the soil. Even memory grows differently here. The amputations weren't just punishment, they were currency too. The RUF used them to buy fear. Entire communities fled at the sight of a stump, a walking warning sign. News agencies later called it psychological warfare. We called it Tuesday. One afternoon, a convoy of journalists arrived under UN escort. They carried cameras, but not questions. They filmed our hands, our faces, our pits, and then left before sunset. That night, I heard the commander say, "Now, the world will know our strength." He didn't mean strength of arms. He meant the strength of terror. Reports from human rights. Watch in 1999 documented it all. The mutilations, the forced labor, the mass displacements. They estimated that over 20,000 people were maimed during the conflict. Each wound became its own silent witness. Each survivor, a living archive of what greed looks like when it forgets it's human. But the horror didn't end at the mine. Hospitals overflowed with amputees, many with wounds cauterized by fire or packed with mud. Foreign doctors came and went, writing notes, taking photos, promising aid. Then the funding dried up, the cameras moved on, and the patients stayed behind, ghosts that refused to fade. One evening, Kamara and I sat by the fire, our hands outstretched toward the smoke. He said, "They took my hand, but not what it remembers." He reached out his remaining one and pressed it to the dirt. "The earth still feels me," he said. I didn't know if he meant comfort or curse, maybe both. The war was clever. It knew that to control people, you didn't just need guns. You needed to shape what they feared to lose. In Sierra Leone, it was limbs. In Angola, it was land. In Liberia, it was loyalty. In all cases, it was choice. When I finally left the mines, I passed through a village called Masiaka. There, an aid worker named Fatmata ran a small shelter for amputees. She said they were teaching the survivors to sew and write again. Her tent smelled of iodine and courage. She told me, "The world's love for diamonds is like a sickness. It doesn't stop just because we die of it." I helped her for a week, lifting buckets, fetching water, holding bandages. The men and women there didn't talk much, but at night I'd hear them humming. Not songs of sadness, songs of defiance. Tiny, quiet rebellions against disappearance. Later, I learned that the images of their wounds, the photographs that horrified the world, became the spark for international reform. People in London, Brussels, and Washington began asking, where do these diamonds come from? The question spread faster than the war ever did. It led to resolutions, sanctions, and finally, the beginnings of the Kimberley Process. It didn't heal the wounds, but it forced the world to look at them. By 2002, the war ended. The RUF surrendered, their leaders captured or killed. Kamara didn't live to see it. He died of infection that same year, his body too tired to keep fighting peace. I buried him near the river, under the tree where he once told me stories. I marked his grave with a single smooth stone. Not a diamond, a river stone, something honest. Sometimes I imagine him standing before God, his missing hand whole again. Maybe he's laughing, telling the angels that eternity feels lighter than a shovel. I hope heaven has no markets, no buyers, no sellers, just silence deep enough to forget the sound of digging. Even now, when I see a ring on someone's finger, I look at the shape of it, the perfect circle, the illusion of completeness. I think of all the hands that never had the chance to wear one, and I remember Kamara's words, "They took my hand, but not what it remembers." He was right. The earth remembers. The soil in Kono still hides small bones among its gravel. Every rainy season, they rise a little closer to the surface, quiet reminders that forever has a price. So when someone tells me that diamonds mean love, I nod, because maybe they do. But I've seen what love costs when it's measured in carats, and I've seen how long it takes the earth to forget the sound of screaming. The world moved on, the markets recovered, the slogans returned, but the missing fingers, they remain. Invisible, but always counting. Counting the promises that were made and never kept. Counting the years that glittered too brightly to see the truth beneath them. The missing fingers stopped counting long ago, but the world kept time as if nothing had happened. It took almost 10 years for the world to notice. 10 years of rivers running red, of children digging beside corpses, of diamonds crossing borders disguised as beauty. The evidence was never hidden, only inconvenient. In Freetown, Journalists sent dispatches that nobody published. Too grim, too distant, too far from the honeymoon pages. When stories did appear, they were short, 2 paragraphs buried beneath stock reports and sports results. Headlines like Sierra Leone unrest continues. Unrest, a small word for something that devoured a country. By the late 1990s, the world's attention was somewhere else. The Balkans, Rwanda, Wall Street, Y2K. Sierra Leone was a map dot that offered no oil, no elections, no audience, just diamonds. And diamonds were already part of the global bloodstream, too precious to question. It's strange how silence has economics. A quiet crisis is cheap to ignore. An exposed one costs reputations. So the silence continued. The United Nations began receiving reports as early as 1994. Ambassadors read them, nodded gravely, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. When questions arose about diamond smuggling, they were met with careful phrases like insufficient verification and complex local dynamics. The language of bureaucracy, designed to sound like concern while accomplishing nothing. In 1997, the British Foreign Office finally issued a statement. It condemned the violence, but not the trade. The next day, De Beers' stock price rose. Markets love moral distance. I remember the first time I saw our story on television. It was a 15-second segment, footage of children in tattered shirts carrying shovels, a voiceover saying, "The war in Sierra Leone continues." Then came an ad for luxury watches. The contrast was almost artful. Some journalists tried harder. An American named Greg Campbell traveled through rebel territory with a camera hidden in his bag. His book, Blood Diamonds, would later ignite outrage around the world. But at the time, it sold quietly. Too honest to trend, too late to save. The world prefers stories with neat heroes. Ours had none. Just miners, rebels, smugglers, and buyers. No clear line between victim and accomplice. And that made it hard to sell empathy. So the world looked away. In 1998, the United Nations sent a special rapporteur on human rights. He spent 3 days in the capital, never visiting the mines. His report was 57 pages long, filled with words like alleged, possible, and potential. He left on a chartered flight the same evening the city lost power. Meanwhile, in the diamond districts of Antwerp, Tel Aviv, and New York, business thrived. Traders knew the rumors. They also knew the profits. In back rooms lit by halogen lamps, parcels of uncut gems changed hands over espresso and soft laughter. Each stone was tagged with a paper trail, the only kind of purity that mattered. Some jewelers asked questions. Most didn't. Customers didn't want history. They wanted sparkle. A salesman in London once told a reporter, "People don't buy where diamonds come from. They buy where they're going." He wasn't wrong. By 1999, the footage had become impossible to ignore. Video of amputees, child soldiers, and burning villages flooded global news feeds. The images shocked viewers, but only briefly. After the outrage came fatigue, then forgetfulness. The world can only cry for so long before dinner. Still, the pressure began to build. NGOs like Global Witness, Partnership Africa-Canada, and Amnesty International launched campaigns exposing the link between diamonds and conflict. They published reports with titles sharp enough to cut glass: A Rough Trade, Conflict Diamonds, The Dark Side of the Glittering Trade. Governments began to respond, not from compassion, but from fear of scandal. The United Nations Security Council imposed sanctions on Angola in 1998, on Sierra Leone in 2000, and later on Liberia. Each ban came with loopholes wide enough to drive a convoy through. Still, they were something, a moral gesture in the language of paperwork. At the same time, De Beers launched its most ambitious rebranding effort. They declared their commitment to ending the trade in conflict diamonds. Press releases spoke of transparency, responsibility, and ethical sourcing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew how the system worked. The company that built the myth of eternal purity was now promising to purify itself. Inside the mines, nothing changed. The guards still watched, the river still swallowed. But we began hearing strange words echo down the line: Kimberley Process. It sounded like hope, or maybe marketing. The process began in May 2000, when South Africa hosted a meeting of diamond-producing and diamond-importing nations. Their goal was simple on paper: to create a certification scheme ensuring that no rough diamond sold internationally could come from conflict zones. 50 countries attended. So did De Beers, World Diamond Council executives, and NGO representatives. For once, the same table held the diggers, the dealers, and the diplomats. But behind the optimism, everyone knew the challenge. How do you trace a stone that looks identical, no matter where it's born? How do you certify an object that can cross a dozen borders in a day? How do you enforce morality in a trade built on secrecy? When the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, the KPCS, was formally implemented in 2003, it was hailed as a triumph of conscience. Each participating country agreed to issue certificates for rough diamonds, declaring them conflict-free. By 2005, the system covered more than 99% of global trade. Governments called it progress. Critics called it paper armor. Even now, experts debate its success. Yes, the wars in Sierra Leone and Angola ended, but the smuggling didn't. Diamonds found new frontiers: the Central African Republic, Zimbabwe's Marange Fields, Congo's Kasai region. Wherever poverty and greed met, sparkle followed. I once asked a UN observer why it took so long for the world to care. He sighed and said, "Because diamonds aren't food. They don't rot. They don't scream. They don't flood refugee camps. They just sit there, quietly perfect." He wasn't wrong. And so, the world looked away until the reflection became too bright to ignore. Then it looked back, not at us, but at itself, at its rings, its earrings, its vaults of polished conscience. It wanted forgiveness, but not memory. Today, the Kimberley Process still exists. It certifies stones, calms buyers, and soothes guilt. But no certification can clean the soil. No paperwork can uncut a wound. Sometimes, when I tell this story, people ask if I'm angry. I tell them no, anger fades. It's the silence that lingers. The years when the world looked away and called it distance. The years when diamonds were forever and humanity was temporary. If you listen closely to a cut diamond under light, you can almost hear it hum. They say it's just vibration, the way energy moves through carbon. But I think it's memory. All the voices the world ignored, trapped in the hardest substance it ever made. They called it a turning point, a new dawn for the diamond trade. The newspapers said the world was finally listening. That conscience, after years of silence, had found its voice in a conference room in South Africa. It was May 2000 in the mining city of Kimberley, a place once famous for discovery, now hosting an attempt at redemption. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same earth that birthed Cecil Rhodes's empire would now host the meeting to cleanse its legacy. In the old De Beers Hall, delegates from over 30 nations gathered. Diplomats, industry giants, and NGOs, all pretending they spoke the same language: morality. They called it the Kimberley Process, a global certification system to prevent the trade in conflict diamonds. Every rough stone, they said, would now come with papers, proof of origin, legitimacy, and peace. The plan was simple. The execution, anything but. I wasn't there, but I've heard the recordings. You can hear the air conditioning hum, the clink of water glasses, the scratch of pens. You can almost feel the weight of performance, each delegate rehearsing empathy while calculating cost. The South African Minister of Mines opened the session. He spoke of blood, forgiveness, and unity. Then came the corporate speeches. A De Beers representative promised complete transparency and zero tolerance for conflict stones. NGOs nodded cautiously. Everyone wanted to believe this was possible, that paperwork could undo history. The Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, or KPCS, took shape over the next 3 years. Each participating country agreed to trade only with others who met the same standards. Every shipment of rough diamonds would need an official government certificate guaranteeing it was conflict-free. No certificate, no trade. It sounded foolproof. But behind the applause, some whispered questions lingered. Who would verify the verifiers? Who would inspect the mines no one wanted to visit? And what about corruption? The quiet ghost that never needed a passport. The answer, of course, was politics. Governments were eager to appear righteous, but unwilling to lose revenue. Countries like Botswana and Namibia, whose economies depended on diamonds, feared too much scrutiny could hurt exports. Consumer nations like the United States and Japan wanted assurance, not accountability. And De Beers, always the master of scarcity, wanted control, of the narrative, not its surrender. So they compromised. The system would rely on self-reporting. Each country would monitor itself, issue its own certificates, and promise to be honest. In other words, trust, sealed in envelopes. Global witness and partnership. Africa-Canada protested. They wanted independent audits, real oversight, stronger definitions of conflict. But their voices were drowned by the clinking of glasses. The champagne flowed easily, the faith even easier. Still, the Kimberley Process launched in 2003 with 52 member states. By the following year, it covered nearly the entire global trade, over $40 billion in rough diamonds annually. The world exhaled in relief. Headlines read, "Blood diamonds banned." It was a comforting fiction. In reality, smugglers adapted within months. Diamonds crossed borders disguised as neighboring exports. Sierra Leone stones labeled as Ghanaian, Angolan as Congolese. Border guards were bribed, papers forged, and certificates reused like currency. The system depended on honesty in an industry that had thrived for centuries on secrecy. Still, something changed. For the first time, the trade had to answer questions. Consumers began asking, where did this come from? Jewelers hung signs reading, conflict-free guaranteed in their windows. Even if the promise was imperfect, the illusion had power. The diamond regained its innocence, not in truth, but in presentation. In Freetown, government officials celebrated the first certified shipment under the Kimberley Process. Television cameras captured the boxes leaving the airport, each labeled Conflict-Free Sierra Leone. The president gave a speech about renewal and progress. The crowd cheered. But in Kono district, the miners still dug barefoot, still sold to middlemen, still earned a handful of rice for a day's labor. The papers may have changed, but the earth had not. One former De Beers executive later admitted, the Kimberley Process was as much about protecting the industry as it was about protecting lives. He wasn't wrong. The system gave corporations moral cover, a shield to sell conscience at scale. Ethical sourcing became a marketing term. Diamonds were no longer bloody, just certified complicated. By 2005, the KPCS reported dramatic success. Conflict diamonds, they claimed, had dropped from 15% of the world's supply to less than 1%. It sounded miraculous, but the statistics came from the same governments that benefited from the trade. The numbers were clean because the paper was. In 2006, Hollywood entered the story. The film Blood Diamond, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Jimon Hounsou, turned our history into spectacle. Audiences wept, debated, and swore they'd never buy another diamond again. For a few months, the industry trembled. Then, like all good myths, it recovered. De Beers launched a new campaign soon after. Forever begins responsibly. It sounded noble. It also sounded familiar. The circle had closed, from marketing desire to marketing guilt, all inside the same velvet box. But to be fair, not all was illusion. The Kimberley Process did achieve some things. It forced conversations. It created traceability systems that inspired other industries. Gold, cocoa, cobalt. It showed that even imperfect morality could move markets, and it gave miners, at least on paper, the dignity of being acknowledged. For a brief moment, the world remembered their names. Today, the Kimberley Process still meets once a year. Delegates gather, give speeches, renew promises. They discuss technical definitions of conflict, while new forms of exploitation, environmental damage, child labor, political corruption go unaddressed. The world changed. The paperwork did not. I once spoke to a man who served as a delegate in those early meetings. He told me, "We wanted to stop the blood, but we didn't want to stop the flow." I asked what he meant. He said, "If we'd really wanted justice, we'd have built a system that could collapse the industry. Instead, we built one that could save it." The Kimberley Process remains a promise, fragile, well-intentioned, and half-kept. It did not purify the trade, but it made denial harder. It did not stop the wars, but it made the world admit it was watching. Sometimes, that's the best humanity manages. Imperfect progress wrapped in perfect rhetoric. In the end, Kimberley gave the world what it always wanted, a story it could live with, a system that said, "We care," without forcing anyone to dig too deep. The mines went quiet, the paperwork grew thick, and the diamonds, they kept shining. They called them clean, certified, conflict-free. But anyone who's ever watched a stone pulled from the earth knows nothing born underground is innocent. After Kimberley, the war ended on paper. The signatures were dry, the conferences adjourned, the applause polite. But in the markets of Monrovia and Conakry, the real trade never stopped. It just changed its handwriting. The smugglers called them ghost diamonds. They crossed borders under false names, wearing new nationalities, carrying documents that looked as clean as the stones themselves. They were invisible to law, visible to profit. I saw them once, wrapped in wax paper, tucked inside a bag of rice. The trader who showed me laughed softly. "These are Ghanaian now," he said, though I knew they came from Kono. He tapped the packet like a heartbeat. Once the paper's stamped, even God can't argue. That was the secret, not hiding the stones, but baptizing them. The Kimberley Process had created a new kind of alchemy, the transformation of guilt into legitimacy through ink and bureaucracy. In 2004, Sierra Leone's government reported record diamond exports, over $125 million worth. A miracle, they said. Peace had brought prosperity, but UN analysts estimated that nearly half of all diamonds leaving the country were still smuggled. The paperwork glowed with integrity. The ground told a different story. The smugglers were clever. They moved stones through Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, and Liberia, blending them with certified shipments. A forged Kimberley certificate cost less than a hotel room in Antwerp. Once the parcel crossed one clean border, it was reborn, legitimate by association. At the Antwerp Diamond District, inspectors would glance at the paperwork, nod, and wave shipments through. The stones would then disappear into a blur of polishing factories, wholesalers, and private dealers. No one could trace a gem after it was cut. No one wanted to. An NGO worker once told me, "Kimberley works best for the honest. Unfortunately, honesty is the only thing you can't certify." She wasn't being cynical, just tired. After years in the field, she'd seen every version of deceit. Diamonds hidden in car tires, in cocoa sacks, even inside plastic bottles floating downriver. They called them the drifting couriers. Each one carried more value than an entire village. In 2006, a report by Global Witness revealed how major traders in Lebanon and Belgium were still buying suspect stone from West Africa. When asked about the source, they replied, "All our diamonds are Kimberley certified." That phrase became the new armor. No one wanted to pierce it. The problem wasn't the idea. It was the distance between the miner and the signature, between the shovel and the stamp, between the truth and the truth that sells. I remember visiting the Koidu mines a few years after the peace accord. The pits were smaller, the guards fewer, but the hunger remained. A local official in a pressed shirt approached me, eager to show progress. He held up a Kimberley certificate like a trophy. "This is our future," he said. Behind him, a barefoot boy carried gravel in a torn bucket. The future looked very old. The ghost trade wasn't just African. It reached into Dubai, India, Hong Kong, any port where paperwork moved faster than conscience. Entire networks thrived on exploiting weak definitions. Kimberley only banned conflict diamonds, those used by rebel movements to fund war against legitimate governments. It said nothing about government violence, corruption, or labor abuse. If a soldier beat a miner under a flag, the diamond was still legal. In Zimbabwe's Marange fields, this loophole became a gold mine disguised as a graveyard. When diamonds were discovered there in 2006, the army moved in to control them. Hundreds of villagers were killed. Thousands were forced into labor. But because it was state security, not rebellion, the Kimberley Process looked away. Marange diamonds flowed freely into the global market, conflict-free by definition, drenched by reality. By 2009, even Global Witness withdrew from the Kimberley Process in protest. They said it had failed to break the link between diamonds and human rights abuses. The industry thanked them for their service, then carried on polishing. Some insiders called it the Diamond Laundromat, a perfectly legal machine that took dirty stones and washed them with bureaucracy. Once cut and sold, they were indistinguishable from any others. The same stone that bought bullets could now symbolize love. All it needed was a receipt. Still, I try to remember the ones who tried to fix it. Inspectors who refused bribes, journalists who kept asking questions, miners who spoke to NGOs despite the risk. For every ghost diamond that slipped through, there was someone trying to drag truth back into the light. Their names rarely made headlines, but they kept the promise alive, even as it cracked. One of them was a woman named Mariama, a local activist from Kenema. She kept notebooks full of numbers, production rates, export logs, satellite photos. She called it her Book of Ghosts. When I asked her why she cared so much, she said, "Because ghosts only haunt when they're forgotten." She died in 2010 during a fever outbreak. Her notebooks were sent to Freetown, where they vanished into government archives. Some say they were misplaced. Others say they were buried on purpose. Either way, her ghost kept moving. Today, you can still buy a diamond anywhere in the world, conflict-free, certified, and guilt-resistant. You can trace its paperwork back to a mine that may not exist, stamped by an official you'll never meet. But you can't trace its silence. You can't see the hands that touched it first. When I look at a cut gem under light, I imagine all its passports, the names it wore, the languages it passed through. Each facet feels like a border crossed, each sparkle a memory rewritten. Maybe that's why diamonds shine so fiercely. They reflect everything but the truth. Ghost diamonds are still out there, not in jungles or rivers anymore, but in vaults, showrooms, and wedding bands. They've been laundered into legend, and like all ghosts, they'll stay quiet until someone finally listens long enough to hear the stories vibrating inside the stone. The first time I saw it was in a crowded theater, years after the digging stopped. Air conditioning, popcorn, the soft blue glow of cell phones flickering like fireflies. The film began with the sunrise, almost like the real ones I used to see in Kono, only cleaner, more cinematic. They called it Blood Diamond, and for a moment, the world seemed ready to listen. Leonardo DiCaprio's accent filled the room, rough, theatrical, South African, with an edge of charm. Jimon Honso's eyes burned with fury I recognized too well, and on the screen, the mines looked exactly as they were. Mud, sweat, rifles, dust. Only this time, the world was watching with safety between them and the truth. A screen. When the credits rolled, the audience sat in silence. Then came applause, the kind people give themselves for feeling empathy. Outside, the lobby filled with voices. I had no idea. Can you believe that's real? It makes you think before buying a diamond. Then, they went home. The movie made headlines. Talk shows debated morality. Celebrities wore synthetic diamonds on red carpets to make a statement. De Beers released a statement too, praising the film for raising awareness while assuring customers their diamonds were ethically sourced through the Kimberley Process. They turned guilt into good press. For a few months, sales dipped, then they rebounded, higher than before, because now, buying a certified diamond wasn't indulgence. It was virtue, a way to show the world that you cared. The marketing pivoted almost overnight. Celebrate love responsibly. The slogan sounded like redemption, but it was still commerce. Hollywood had done what no UN resolution could. make the crisis digestible. In 2 hours it offered tragedy, redemption, and closure, everything real life denied. It gave audiences catharsis instead of commitment, and it gave corporations the perfect scapegoat, history. In reality, Sierra Leone was still healing. The amputee camps were still full. The riverbeds still shimmered with labor, but the cameras had moved on. The world believed the problem had been solved because the credits said so. In Koidu, I watched the film projected on a wall of a community center powered by a generator. The crowd was quiet, not because they were impressed, but because they were remembering. When the scene showed the boy soldier trembling with a rifle, someone in the audience whispered, "That was me." When the explosion hit the village, a woman covered her child's eyes, not to protect him, just instinct. Afterward, no one clapped. A man at the back stood and said, "They made us famous." Then he laughed until he cried. The film made millions. It won awards, trended on talk shows, and helped launch ethical diamond campaigns across the world. Retailers introduced lines of conflict-free engagement rings, each one accompanied by a certificate and a sense of absolution. In a way, blood diamond completed the circle. The same gem that once symbolized love, then greed, now symbolized redemption. But redemption is a luxury too, and like all luxuries, it comes with a price tag. A year after the movie's release, diamond sales in the United States hit record highs. Consumers reported feeling better about their purchases. The Kimberley Process website saw more traffic than ever. Governments pointed to these numbers as proof the system worked. The system pointed to the numbers as proof the world cared. And somewhere between the two, truth disappeared like dust on a mirror. I met a journalist in Freetown who said, "The film saved no one, but it changed everything." She meant that it changed perception, not policy. For the first time, people knew where Sierra Leone was, but knowing and acting are different verbs. Even the actors got involved. DiCaprio funded environmental causes and campaigned for ethical sourcing. His sincerity was real, his reach enormous. But even he couldn't control how the narrative evolved. The story became a brand. Conflict-free became a tagline. And soon, no one wanted to talk about the bodies anymore, just the solutions. Corporations understood something simple. If you can't bury a scandal, polish it. De Beers restructured its operations, reducing its market share and emphasizing local partnerships. Smaller brands emerged with names like Pure Origin and True North Diamonds. They advertised transparency, sustainability, and love, the holy trinity of modern consumption. At the same time, a new rival appeared. Lab-grown diamonds, perfect, ethical, identical, born not in Earth's fire but in machines humming under fluorescent light. No warlords, no mines, no ghosts, just carbon arranged by conscience. The industry panicked at first, then adapted again. If guilt was the new luxury, they'd sell that too. And so, the mirage grew. A world where diamonds could symbolize both atonement and excess, where people could feel pure while holding what history could not. I sometimes wonder if the film meant something different to those of us who lived it. It wasn't entertainment, it was memory translated into English, edited for empathy. It took our pain and gave it subtitles. And maybe that's better than silence, but it's not the same as justice. Years later, when tourists came to visit post-war Sierra Leone, they asked where the famous diamond mines were. Guides led them to the river, showed them men still digging, still barefoot, still dreaming. The visitors took photos, nodded solemnly, and left, with stories to tell at dinner parties. Each visit felt like another screening. The mirage was complete. The country had peace, the world had closure, and the diamonds had paperwork. But not everything could be polished. The river still carried its quiet hum. The miners still whispered their prayers, and the ghosts still glimmered just beneath the surface. The film had ended, but the story hadn't. Sometimes, when I hear people say blood diamond changed the world, I nod, because maybe it did. In the way mirrors change what they reflect. They show you everything, but nothing beneath. The mirage lives on, in every diamond store window, in every promise that starts with a sparkle. It's beautiful, and it's empty, and it's ours. The war ended on paper long before it ended in people. Peace arrived like a rumor, soft, uncertain, unbelievable. One day, the soldiers stopped coming, the checkpoints emptied, the trucks rusted in place, and the river, patient as always, kept moving. They said the guns were gone, but we could still hear their echo in the hills. Sometimes, when thunder rolled, children flinched. The sound was too familiar. It took years for thunder to become weather again. In Kono, the pits filled slowly with rain and weeds. The same holes that once swallowed men began to bloom. Green vines crept down their edges, claiming back what war had borrowed. If you didn't know better, you'd think nature forgave us. But forgiveness, like diamonds, is never that pure. I returned to the mines once, years after I'd left. The air smelled different, less of iron, more of dust and time. The camp was gone, replaced by a cooperative signboard painted in hopeful blue. Community Development Project. A few men still dug, but they sang as they worked. The song wasn't joyful, it was steady, a rhythm that kept them company rather than alive. I found the tree where Kamara was buried. It was taller now, thick with shade. The stone I placed years ago was half sunk into the earth. I sat beside it for a long time. I told him about the peace, the elections, the new roads, the tourists, and I told him about the film, the certificates, the slogans. I told him he was famous, though he never asked to be. The earth beneath me was soft. I wondered if it still remembered the weight of our footsteps, the sound of our shovels, the things we whispered to it when no one else would listen. Maybe the ground keeps everything, the blood, the songs, the promises. Maybe that's why diamonds last forever. They're the Earth's way of not forgetting. Around 2012, the government declared Sierra Leone open for foreign investment. Billboards promised new prosperity and peaceful minerals. Foreign companies arrived with clean boots and legal documents. They built fences around the old pits, rebranded them as ethical concessions. Some hired locals, some didn't. Either way, the story sold well. The diamonds kept flowing, this time with receipts. Each stone certified, photographed, documented. The illusion of accountability shining as bright as the gem itself. But the pay didn't change. The miners still earned enough to survive, never enough to stop digging. The ground still gave, the people still waited. A new word appeared in the papers, sustainable. It meant many things to those who used it, and almost nothing to those who lived it. The same mines were now called resources, the same workers, artisans, the same scars, heritage. Rebranding is cheaper than healing. Sometimes, school groups visit the old sites. Teachers tell children that this is where peace began, that the world came together to stop the blood trade. The children nod politely, their shoes sinking into the same mud that once swallowed their ancestors' cries. History makes everything sound cleaner in past tense. One afternoon, I met a young miner named Isara. She was 17, born after the war. She worked the river with her mother, searching for small stones to sell. When I asked if she knew what blood diamond meant, she laughed. "They say those were before my time," she said. "Now we have peace diamonds." She said it the way one repeats a proverb, proud but unsure. Her words stayed with me. Maybe that's how forgetting begins, not with denial, but with better vocabulary. Far away, in glass towers and jewelry stores, the diamond industry tells a new story. They speak of traceability, blockchain certificates, carbon neutral mining. The slogans change, the glow remains. But I've learned that progress often wears the same clothes as amnesia. Still, I can't pretend nothing changed. There are schools now where there used to be camps. There are girls in classrooms where once there were soldiers. There are hospitals, paved roads, even hope, thin and trembling, but real. And sometimes, that's enough to keep the ghost quiet. In 2014, I attended a ceremony where former miners planted trees along the riverbank. Each one carried a small tag with the name for the lost, the buried, the unknown. The project was called Roots of Peace. The soil was poor, but the trees tried anyway. When the wind blew, the leaves shimmered like the surface of a water. It felt like the earth breathing again. Later that night, as I walked home, I passed a jewelry shop window. Behind the glass, a single diamond glowed under perfect light. The tag said, conflict-free, ethically sourced. It was flawless. I watched it for a long time. It looked like everything we wanted to believe. Hope trapped in geometry. but I also saw the faces behind it, faint as reflections. Kamara, Mariama, Isata, ghosts of labor, memory, and mercy. They say a diamond is forever. Maybe that's true, but not for the reasons the advertisements promise. It lasts because the earth refuses to forget. It remembers every touch, every lie, every prayer whispered into the soil. And maybe that's the truest kind of eternity. Not beauty, but memory that will not die. Now, when I wake to the sound of rain against tin roofs, I think of the river, of the pits, of all the hands that once dug beneath the same sky. I think of what the earth saw: men with guns, men with shovels, men who mistook greed for purpose. And then I think of how it healed itself, inch by inch, root by root. The earth doesn't forgive, it absorbs, it keeps, it remembers. Maybe that's why the diamonds still shine, not as trophies, but as warnings. Each one a memory of what happens when beauty becomes worth more than life. Each one a piece of the planet's diary, written in light. I sometimes imagine Kamara's voice whispering through the soil. They took my hand, but not what it remembers. And now, I finally understand him. Because even when the world forgets, the earth does not. It holds everything, every secret, every sin, every sparkle. So if you ever find yourself standing before a glittering stone, take a breath, look past the surface, listen closely. If you're quiet enough, you might hear it hum. Not with greed, but with history. The soft, steady heartbeat of a planet that remembers everything we tried to bury.